We've taken a look at Samuel and Saul, and we've been studying on David here recently, along with Saul. We see very different characteristics of all three of these men. We'll continue this morning to look at Saul and David, and actually Samuel, even though he's already dead and in the grave, will make an appearance for us, so to speak. All right, well, anyway. And then next week is we'll cover Saul's death, and I think from there it'll continue with David. But a lot of lessons for us in these. That's one of the things that I really like about looking at the history of Israel is Israel was God's chosen nation. They were chosen to spread the gospel. They were chosen to share with the world the true God of heaven. They failed, and there are many lessons in them, but also in men like Samuel, Saul, and David as to what God expects, what is acceptable, and how we in our lives can please God. And we'll see that each of them were very flawed. There is not a single man mentioned in the Scriptures other than the man Jesus Christ that was perfect. They all had their flaws. But you can see that many of them that are recorded in there, due to their faith in God, were great men of God and overcame many of those flaws through the grace of God. All right, to kick us off this morning, let's go back to 1 Samuel 26 and 25, if somebody would read that. So, in this verse, we see once again that Saul has been chasing David. David gave his plea earlier in the chapter to Saul. He pleads to them, "What have I done to thee? How have I wronged thee at all?" And Saul, in listening to David's plea, acknowledges that the wrong is with him and not with David. And as you look at 25, which Cheryl just read, Saul acknowledges to David, "Blessed be thou, my son David. Thou shalt both do great things and also shalt still prevail." So David went on his way and Saul returned to his place. Based on that verse, how do you think the relationship is between Saul and David? Sounds good. Sounds good. And yet, as we begin chapter 27, but has it changed? And that's the problem. A lot of times there's no inward change, and that was certainly the case with Saul. And as we begin chapter 27, we're going to see that things seem to be right exactly back where they were with Saul seeking to murder David. So, chapter 27, and again, we have 4 chapters this morning. Chapter 27, 28, 29, and 30 to cover. And again, I don't know that we'll get through all of them. We'll get as far as we get. As we look at chapter 27, and it's a short chapter, only 12 verses, the first 4 verses, some keys that I want to call out. The first one says, "And David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul." That's completely flip from 26:25. What happened? We're not told. We don't know what happened exactly, but my guess is that Saul again went back. His heart was never changed, and so he still, eventually began seeking to destroy David once again. What is the indication here by David's statement about where he is now. Yeah. Now, how long has this gone on? We're not told exactly, but some writers believe this has gone on for more than 10 years at this point. David was a young boy when he slew Goliath and led the armies of Israel against the Philistines and won that great battle, which brought about the song of the women that Saul hath killed his thousands, and David hath. Yes. And so it's really been from that point forward that this has gone on. 10 years. Think about it. If you were in the shoes of David, what would your state of mind be? How would you feel? Probably pretty disheartened. I would agree. We very well might be doing the same thing or worse. Here he says, I shall not perish one day by the hand of God. And yet, as Brother Evans said, God each time has delivered Satan from Saul. Satan has delivered David from Saul. So we can at times get down in our lives. And in fact, even though we may not have somebody seeking for our demise, aren't there times that you get a little depressed about how things are going? And you start thinking, where's God? Why isn't God taking care of this? Or you start thinking, I have to do something myself. I'm going to have to act. And too many times when we take that approach, what happens? Trouble. When we decide to take it on ourselves, we generally create trouble for ourselves. And David is no different. Here in these verses, he says, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape into the land of the Philistines. And Saul shall despair of me to seek me any more in any coast of Israel. So shall I escape out of his hand. So what's David's decision to do? Run to the Philistines. Had he done this before? Where did he run? Yeah, to the Philistines, to the city of Gath. Who is the king at Gath? Where does he run this time? Same place, same king. And yet he had already made a fool of himself. Well, I mean, literally made a fool of himself, drooling in his beard, acting as the crazy man because they figured out who he was. He was the one that had slain 10,000, and I'm sure that many of them were from the city of Gath. And so to turn around and do the same thing again, there is a phrase that's used for that. It's called insanity. Insanity is doing the same thing over the, yeah. Okay. So he's going to escape to the land of the Philistines. The problem is he is the one who had the song sung. They knew it. He knew it. And yet he's running to the enemy. Why in the world would Achish even consider accepting him there? It's somewhat speculation, but think of Achish as king of a great city, as the leader of his army, and think about David, who was Saul's leader over his army, and think about what David's military had done to the military of Achish and the Philistines in general. And he is at odds with Saul. So one, there is oftentimes great military respect for great leaders. Civil War times, you saw great respect between some of the generals north to the south and vice versa for great military leaders. Even though they may disagree with one another philosophically, they may recognize the supposed genius of the mind and also may have thought they had an advantage over the individual. In this particular case, we'll find that he did have an advantage. But the other thing, as Brother Evans said, was he, by this point, after 10 years of being a fugitive, David is not as much considered that great military leader as he once was. It's more, he's the one that's fleeing potential death from Saul. And so they both had, the enemy of my enemy is my, boy, I'm having a hard time with these cliches now, is my friend. Okay, very good. Is my friend. I should have rehearsed these before. All right. So that very well may have been his thought. As you go on and look, so David makes this decision to run to Gath, to hide himself there from Saul. Surely Saul, he says in that first verse, Saul shall despair of me. What's that mean? If I go into the land of the Philistines, Saul's not going to come after me. He's not going in to invade the land. He's going to give up and move on. And certainly, as we look through these verses, I think that initially David is right. The indication is David is right. And he'll escape out of his hand. He didn't inquire of God. And in making his decision himself, who did he impact? Eventually his family comes, and those men that followed with him, they all followed in his decision-making. So his impact was not just on him, but it was spread across many other people. What does that tell you about your decisions today? You may not know it. You may not think about it. But those decisions that you make impact more than just you, even when you think it's all about you. Cindy accuses me of that sometimes. It's all about you, isn't it? It doesn't just impact me. But the things that I do, even if it's not a direct impact, my example is seen by other people and causes them to act in certain ways based on the way I live my life, the things that I say and the things that I do. So it's important here, and certainly as we go on through this, we'll see that they're greatly impacted by the decisions of David. We go on to verse 5, and David has dwelt there with Achish. He's built up some confidence in Achish that David is now keep in mind, who is David? David was that shepherd boy who Samuel came and did something, anointed as king of Israel. Now he's in Achish, and the anointed king of Israel is now referring to himself as in verse 5, servant. Thy servant. Thy servant. To a pagan Philistine. To a pagan Philistine. Thy servant is how he refers to himself. So, what is David's request of Achish? Yes, you have been gracious to me, O king. Besides, he said, you've been gracious to me. You've allowed me to come in among you, but I'm not worthy of that. Give me a city where I can go and dwell. And so he gives him the city of Ziklag. Ziklag, yes. A city in southern Judah. It was captured by the Philistines, and Achish gives him that city. David moves there along with his 2 wives. Now, he used to have one. Her name was Michal. Now, what did Saul do? We didn't get there last week, but what did Saul do with Michal? Gave her to another man. Now, how many of you men would be fighting mad about that? So, who are these 2 wives that David has? We don't know much about one, Ahinoam, but Abigail. Who's Abigail? Nabal's wife, widow. Nabal's widow. So we didn't get there last week, but Nabal was the name means fool. And he was a son of Belial, as the scriptures refer to him as. He was a very useless man. That's right. Useless man. Covetous. He was all about his possessions. And he refused David when David's men had protected his shepherds and his livestock. He refused to give him anything to eat, anything to drink. And David was going to go back and kill Nabal, slaughter him. But it was Abigail, his wife, who the scripture says was a very wise woman, a very gracious woman. And she came out with the food and drink for David and his men and averted what happened. It was shortly thereafter that God brought about, according to the scriptures, the death of Nabal. And David then went back and married Abigail. Now, what's the problem with this? He already had one wife, even though she was given to another. And now he has, and with Ahinoam, a third wife. Now, what's the Bible say about that? Man is a few days and full of trouble. Yeah. One wife is enough for any man. You don't need more than that. You need just one. So anyway, David establishes there in Ziklag, and from there, the scriptures tell us that he lived there for about a year and 4 months, 16 months total. And what was he doing there during that time? Yeah, he was doing some raiding here and there in southern Judah, but there was some confusion. What were you going to say? Yeah, people of the land, whom, if you go back, Joshua and the children of Israel were instructed to do what with the people that lived in the land? Drive them all out. They won't go destroy them. Why? Because of their paganness. Now, that was instructed of Joshua and the Israelites. Now, in David taking this on himself to go to these places, these cities, and to kill these people, was it a direct command to David from God? It was a direct command to Israel, but there's no indication that David sought God's advice in what he did at this particular time. The reason I bring it up is because sometimes we'll look and we'll say, this is the right thing to do. But is it what God would have us to do? We might, in our mind, think, God wants me to go over to a foreign nation and share the gospel. But is it what God wants you to do, or is it what you want to do? Maybe God has purposed that you need to be here and spreading the gospel here. Maybe down the road, go over there. Paul had a desire to go to Rome, but he didn't go when he necessarily wanted to. There were several times he was stopped from going here or there, and it was on God's timing, what God wanted from him. And so oftentimes in our minds, we will choose to do certain things that may be right in God's eyes, except the wrong person or the wrong time. We have to be careful in those things. These raids upon these cities, they were enemies of Israel, the Amorites, Amalekites, and other pagan nations that had taken Judean cities of Judah, southern Judah. But how was David benefiting from this? When he went, what did he do? He destroyed all the people, and he took all the spoils back with him. Now, David was never a wealthy man, even when he served Saul. There's no indication that David gained great wealth from all that he had done. But during this time, David seemingly amassed quite a bit of wealth with all the spoils that he had taken. Now, these are enemies of Israel, which means they are to Achish. They are his allies, Amalekites and these others. And so, when David comes before Achish, I may say Achish, I may say Achish. It probably depends on whether I get a pain in my back at that particular time. Achish. What was David telling Achish when he went before Achish? And Achish said, "What have you been doing?" Yeah, he told him, "I'm going into the southern parts of Judah," sort of giving that impression, I'm taking and destroying the people of Israel. And of course, Achish took that as what? His loyalty to Achish and that enmity that had developed now between David and Israel. Before that, until David proved himself, could there have always been a concern about David going back and fighting for Israel? Possibly so. Yeah, but this is what Achish would have looked at as burning your bridges. David going back and fighting against the Israelites. They would never accept him now, no matter what. So, in essence, David lies about what he's doing. He continues to gain Achish's favor. He becomes wealthy in the process. And that brings us to chapter 28. Boy, we're moving along, aren't we? Chapter 28. So all is going well. Achish thought that he'd found a loyal servant in David. David thinks that he's found a way to placate Achish while maintaining safety from Paul's plans to kill him. So to him, it was the right move to go to the Philistines, the city of Gath and Achish. All was sort of going great. However, in a short period of time, things turned 180 degrees. Because what does Achish decide to do? Pain in the back again. What does Achish decide to do in chapter 28? Yeah. He whatever, the time in his mind was right for them to go against Israel. Now, part of it might have been the fact that he now had David within his army. Possibly the thought that David and his men would be that thing that they were missing that would allow them to get over the hump and overcome Israel and the armies of Israel. So what does he tell David? We're going to go fight the Israelites, and guess what? You're going with me. And I trust you so much that you are going to be the keeper of my head. You will be my inner circle. Protect me, to keep me safe. So, how does David reply to that? Well, David said to Achish, verse 2 of chapter 28, "Surely thou shalt know what thy servant can do." What does that mean? You're going to find out. Now, is he being specific? I mean, he's indicating you're about to see something great, but will it necessarily be great in Achish's eyes? We're not told exactly what that meant to David. I'm sure that Achish said, "Can't wait." He's rubbing his hands together. Here we go. It's sort of like sitting there at the barbecue grill and waiting for those ribs. You know, you're in the last few minutes waiting for the ribs to come off, and you're drooling. Or maybe it's something else for some of you. I don't know. Maybe it's fried chicken. That I'm sure is Achish's mind thought. Now, in verse 3, all of a sudden we cut. Verse 3 says, now Samuel was dead. Now, that occurred in chapter 25. Why are we being reminded of that now? Well, we're going to cut to Saul. And we're going to look at the challenges as Saul gets wind of this invasion and begins to get worried about it. Verse 3 says, now Samuel was dead, and all Israel lamented him and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. Okay, well, I guess that's good to know, but why are we being told that here? Saul is desperate. Philistines are about to invade. What do I do? Now, before, he failed to seek God, or he sought God incorrectly. He sought God without the man of God, trying to usurp authority he did not have. And then, oftentimes, he rejected what God had instructed him to do. Here, Saul is now, Samuel's gone. He can't go to Samuel. And it'll go on to tell us here, well, it says he lamented him. He had put away those things familiar, the spirits, the wizards, out of the land. So those things had been put away, and honestly, that was according to the instructions of whom? That the wizards and occult practices had all been put away? Well, Saul, but prior to that, Samuel. And even before that, when you go back to Leviticus and the law, God told him, he commanded, put away these things from you. Okay? Put away these things from you. Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 31. It's actually also Leviticus 20:27 and Deuteronomy 18:10 and 11. But Leviticus 19:31 says, regard not them that have familiar spirits, neither seek after wizards to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. So Israel, before they came into the land, were instructed to eliminate all those things from them. Saul, my guess is early on in his reign, before he had turned from God and God had rejected him, had actually decreed that all those people be driven out of the land. And so that's what it's telling us here. Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land, those that dealt in the occults. And the Philistines gathered, verse 4, themselves together and came and pitched in Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel together, and they pitched in Gilboa. And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid. We talked about it before, a lot last week. What does fear oftentimes cause you to do? Desperate things. It should cause us as God's people to do what? Turn to God. But Saul was not a person of God. He had rejected God. He was afraid, his heart greatly trembled, and when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by the prophets. So the Lord wouldn't answer him. Now, that began when Samuel was still alive. God refused to answer Saul, refused to lead and guide him as in his capacity as king of Israel. Gives three things here. The Lord at different times had used dreams. He had used Urim. Now, what's Urim? Yeah, part of the ephod. Part of the ephod, yes, part of the ephod. And it was used to help decipher decisions from God. Thummim and Urim were both a part of the ephod. Some speculate they were stones that had something written on them. And then the last was the prophets. So Saul couldn't get any answers. Now, it says here that Saul inquired, and then down in verse 7, it says, "Then said Saul to his servant, Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her." So we have Saul inquiring of God, and Saul wanting to inquire of this woman. The words are not the same in the Hebrew. The one is asking for an answer, and that was of God, while the other one is a diligently seeking. Which one do you think Saul inquired, and which one did he diligently seek? May not be what you think. He inquired of God. Almost a passive. This is my first step. I'm going to go to God. But when that failed, and God wouldn't answer him, what did he do? He became more desperate. He became very diligent in seeking information from a woman that hath a familiar spirit. Now, what's a familiar spirit? Ghost? Yeah, it refers to someone who acts as sort of a go-between between the living and the dead. Now, some of you may be creeped out by this a little bit. I don't know. I don't know what you think about ghosts. Hopefully not. There is, in fact, we're going to read this, beginning in verse 7. "Then said Saul unto his servant, Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said to him, Behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. And Saul disguised himself and put on other raiment." He didn't want to be seen by anybody because he had outlawed it. "And he went, and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring me him up, whom I shall name unto thee. And the woman said unto him, Behold, thou knowest what Saul hath done." Did she know this was Saul? No. "How he hath cut off those that have familiar spirits and the wizards out of thy hand. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life to cause me to die?" In other words, you're asking me to do this, but it's been outlawed. "And Saul sware to her by" what? "By the Lord, saying, As the Lord liveth, there shall no punishment happen to thee for this thing." Now, is that the stupidest thing you've ever heard? Who had given the command to drive these people out? Originally, Saul had, but go back, originally in Leviticus, it's God. And yet Saul here is declaring by the Lord. He's making an oath by the Lord that nothing will happen to you. What control did he have? He couldn't even get an answer from God. Do people do that today? They make all kinds of statements using God's name. A very stupid thing to say. And yet he did. "As the Lord liveth, there shall no punishment happen to thee for this thing." Verse 11, then said the woman, "Whom shall I bring up unto thee?" And he said, "Bring me up Samuel." Why Samuel? Well, it used to work for me. Maybe now that Samuel is dead, he'll have a change of heart and he'll feel compassion. I don't know. Bring me up Samuel. He was the man of God, and he could seek information from God on my behalf. "When the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice, and the woman spake unto Saul, saying, Why hast thou deceived me, for thou art Saul?" Her eyes were opened. I don't know what caused it, but she recognized that this was Saul himself. She was then afraid. Verse 13, And the king said unto her, Be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods descending out of the earth. Now, did she see gods? The term there does not necessarily mean gods. You noticed it's in a small g. That's the interpreters. It's not the original language, because there wouldn't have been a capital or lowercase or capital, either one. But she said gods ascending out of the earth. What she saw was Samuel. She may have seen others, I don't know. Verse 14, and he said unto her, What form is he of? And she said, An old man cometh up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed himself. So Saul asked for Samuel. What does he think he has here? He thought he had Samuel. What did the scriptures indicate? Verse 15, and Samuel said to Saul, Why hast thou disquieted me to bring me up? And Saul answered, I am sore distressed, for the Philistines make war against me. And God is departed from me, and answereth me no more, neither by prophets, nor by dreams. Therefore I have called thee, that thou mayest make known unto me what I shall do. Then said Samuel, do you think this was Samuel? By the way the writer has conveyed this, I think it was Samuel. Did this woman actually have the power to raise Samuel? To bring his spirit or his ghost up? Whose power do you think brought Samuel up? I think it was the power of God using this woman, and as we continue to look at this, for his purposes. Then said Samuel, verse 16, Wherefore then dost thou ask of me, seeing the Lord is departed from thee, and is become thine enemy? And the Lord hath done to him as he spake by me, for the Lord hath rent the kingdom out of thy hand, and given it to thy neighbor, even to David. Now, that's history. We're already aware of that. It was because of Saul's disobedience, failing God. Verse 18 goes on and says, Because thou obeyedst not the voice of the Lord, nor executest his fierce wrath upon Amalek, therefore hath the Lord done this thing unto thee this day. Moreover, not only that, but guess what? Added to what's already occurred. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with thee into the hand of the Philistines. Did Saul get his answer? He got his answer. Was it the answer he wanted? No. He's going to deliver, the Lord deliver Israel with thee into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. The Lord also shall deliver the host of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. What is Samuel telling him here? You're going to lose the battle. You're going to die. And your sons are going to die. Now, it doesn't say it specifically here. It kind of hints at it, but 1 Chronicles 10, 13, 14 indicates that this last portion is specifically because he went to the woman of Endor and asked her to bring about familiar spirit. 1 Chronicles, what did I say? Corinthians? Okay. 1 Chronicles 10, 13, 14 says, So Saul died for his transgression, which he committed against the Lord, even against the word of the Lord, which he kept not, and also for asking counsel of one that had a familiar spirit to inquire of it, and inquired not of the Lord. Therefore he slew him and turned the kingdom unto David the son of Jesse. So what was the punishment for Saul's going to the woman of Endor? Lost his life prematurely. There's no indication that that was God's original plan, but it became that plan at this point. Too many Christians today have the idea that things of the occult, horoscopes, psychic hotlines, Ouija boards, fortune telling, tarot cards, and palm reading are all harmless games. They are not. Saul suffered because of them. God's word's very clear that we need to avoid those things in our lives. The issue isn't whether they are real or fake. In this particular case, I don't know if this woman had ever really called a familiar spirit a true spirit up or whether she was a fake in the process. I think today there are many, many fakes out there who they give you a general reading and claim, I have read your fortune. There may be some who actually, by the power of Satan, may be able to say certain things. Certainly in the end times, there are certain things that men are given power to do that are not natural. It's not whether it's real or it's not. It's really more that God has identified them as an abomination, and we are to stay away from them. I've heard many churchgoers that have talked about, my horoscope, or the stars, or my sign. I'm a Gemini. I don't know what that means. I just know I'm a Gemini. But we need to be careful. Those are things of the occult. They come from pagan origins. And so we need to be careful and not be involved. 1 Timothy 2:5 says, "For there is one God and one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus." So we shouldn't be looking for the answers from the occults or the tools of the occults, even in fun. What was the effect of Samuel's words on Saul? In verse 20 it says, "Then Saul fell straightway all along on the earth, was sore afraid because of the words of Samuel, and there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no bread all day nor all night." Was Saul upset, worried, fretting? I mean, yeah. And again, you look at Saul, and this was a heaping man, head and shoulders taller than all else. He looked king. He comported himself, with the exception of his vengeance against David, in a fashion that seemed like a king. Eventually, the woman and Saul's servants had to plead with Saul to eat before they returned that same night, verse 25. Any comments, questions? Got about 2 minutes and 2 chapters. All right. So Achish, back to David. Achish believed that David was loyal to him. So everything's a go. And they take off. They're going to invade Israel. But what happens? Yeah. David may have fooled Achish, but many of the officers still, they were very versed in that song. Saul has killed his thousands. David's killed his 10,000s. He's going to get up there and he's going to turn on us, and he's going to kill us. And so they didn't trust him. And so they put the pressure on Achish, who then decided to do what? Yeah, he didn't have the support of the people he had to have the support of. He sent David and his men back. The problem is, when David and his men got back to Ziklag, what had happened? Yeah, the Amalekites had come in, easily took the city because the fighting men were all gone. They destroyed the city, but they took all the spoils, and they took the women and the families of the city. David's men had already journeyed up to battle and then turned around and journeyed back and were pretty tired at that point. But then the loss, what they saw, grieved them tremendously. How many times have you been in a situation where just the emotional stress and strain, something like this, just completely drained you and you've had no physical strength because of it? I've been in that boat before. They inquired of God. Now, this would seem like a no-brainer, right? You know, Amalekites came in and they took your families, your wives, and you go after them. Maybe not the wives, but maybe the families. I'm kidding. That's a joke. I hope you do better, Dan. All right. Seems like a no-brainer, but David inquired of God. Why? He learned his lesson. Again, even when things seem the right thing to do, Go to God, because oftentimes God will give us specific instructions in how to go about it. Or He'll tell us, this is what's going to happen. You know, He may not speak to us audibly, but His Holy Spirit will speak to our hearts. We need to seek His will in all things, even when it is the right thing to do. So with that, God told him, go after them. You will deliver them and bring them back all safely. And so they start on the way, but they get to the brook of Besor, and what happens? They were exhausted. And so David left the 200 on the one side of the brook. He took the other 400, and they went on. They came across a man who was laying out in the field, passed out. And what does he do? They stop. Now, they were in hot pursuit, but they stopped. And they gave him bread, and they gave him water, and they helped to recover him. Now, that seems like a huge distraction and a time waster. But what did it turn out for David and his men? He was a servant of an Amalekite, and he was able to tell them what happened, and he led them to the camp. There they found them drunken, partying over the great victory and the great spoils, and it was an easy victory for David and his men. They recovered all that they had, plus all the other spoils that the Amalekites had gained from they didn't just go against Ziklag, but evidently through many cities of southern Judah, Israelite and other. And so they recovered a vast amount of spoils, and then they returned and they joined up with the 200. And the men, the 400 with David, said what? They didn't go with us. They're not sharing. These are our spoils. What does David say? This was given to us by God. We oftentimes think of ourselves as delivering great things when really it's God. You know, our jobs, our incomes. We think, boy, I'm the master. I'm good. I got this promotion because I'm so good. You know, what else could they do? Well, you better get on your hands and knees and thank God and not be so conceited in your mind over what you've accomplished. All our blessings, all gifts come from God. And David reminded them of that and said, it will be that spoils will be shared across. That's where the title of the lesson. I had to scratch my head, you know, when I first started looking at it. Where did they come up with that title? What seemed fair to the 400? We did the battle. We put our lives in jeopardy. It's ours. But in reality, that so-called fairness was in truth greed. Was it not? They forgot what had just happened. They wanted it all to themselves. I don't want to share with 200 more. That means I get a third less. You know? So it boils down to greed. And too many times what looks like on the surface as fairness, in reality, is nothing more than just greed covered over. And again, you can see that a lot of times today in our society. We're past time. Any other thoughts? Dan, there's not enough time in the morning. I don't know what to tell you. No, I better not. I could get